All right, thanks so much for joining me today, Nick. My first question was just going to be, how'd you get involved in doing comic art, and was it always something you were interested in?
I started I wasn't always interested in comics. I was a collector at heart, and around when I was 11 or 12, I collected baseball cards. And in the baseball card shops, they would have comic books. And I would like flip through them, kind of got interested in them. And then the death of Superman happened, and everyone wanted those like four covers when he came back. And then obviously the black bag and the white bag sealed from like 92, 93. I was probably 11 then. And so I ended up wanting and getting one of those. I ended up reading those books, and I didn't understand comics because I could not. There was something about comics drawn the way they were drawn then, or in the '90s, where it was kind of like I didn't believe the story was happening. I'm like, wait, did this person die? Like I couldn't figure out sequential storytelling, so I never really got into comics. And then in high school, I was always good at doodling, like in the margins of my pages, but I never took any art classes or anything. Played football, got a job when I was 16, got a girlfriend, got a car, and then I ended up having enough credits to graduate early just because there was less credits needed back then. And I realized I didn't have to go to my classes anymore. And so I did not go to any of my classes for the last 6 months of my high school year, ended up getting zeros and got removed from a couple of honors classes into like remedial reading. And when I got moved into remedial reading, there was another kid in that class who drew from his head. He was kicked out of his class because all he wanted to do was draw. And he was going to this school called the Joe Kubert School of Cartooning in Dover, New Jersey. And he could draw off his head. It was like magic. And I was like, man. And I could always kind of doodle. So he was showing me stuff. He was taking correspondence courses before he went. I was doing like my father's a construction worker, and I was doing a little bit of construction work and figured I would be a construction worker like my brothers and my dad. But then once we graduated, he took me well, first he would go to the shop on Wednesdays. That's when new comics come out, obviously, but I didn't know at the time. And I would go and look at stuff, and I still couldn't quite get sequential storytelling. But then I found the artist I love, Frank Quietly, and he was working on a book called The Authority with Mark Millar, and he drew kind of lumpy, and I'm a big guy, and I look like a potato, and he drew like his superheroes like power lifters, and I love that. And then when I read it, the timing was so good. Like other guys, and I figured it out now as an adult or as an artist. If I'm mad and I put my foot like on the stool and I pose and I'm Batman and I'm mad, it's so posed, so romanticized, and then like all this cool hatching and perfect abs. That was my disconnect. But quietly when he drew and like Midnighter's agitated, he's also like a gay Batman like prototype. But when he's mad, he like turns his head and then he like slowly moves and he's moving in time and sequence perfectly, basically, because quietly's a master. And what and when he gets up and he punches someone and he kills them, I want to know what happens next. And all of a sudden, I'm reading these books, and then I'm finding other European artists like Mobius and Jeff Darrow. And there's a guy who's passed away named Seth Fisher that's amazing. And I started following those guys, about five guys that I just loved. And it turned out a lot of the stories were good. I loved Mike Allred's stuff on Ecstatics. I love Quietly stuff. And then when I went to the Kubert School, and I didn't get to go, like I didn't get to go, but I got to go visit, and I would show this Frank Quietly mashed potato guy to people, and someone said that guy draws like mashed potatoes, and I'm like, no, this stuff is cool, dude. And I didn't know what I was talking about. They like the Kubert boys and Jim Lee and all those guys, and what happened was Quietly won Wizard World Magazine's best artist like a year later. And then he got the X-Men gig. Then he did, We Three and All-Star Superman. And I was like, man, I can't draw for crap, but I have an eye for what's good, to me, and obviously once you find Mobius, you find the Mobius tree, and all those guys are kind of on the Mobius tree. And then that kind of set me on fire. I wanted to be a comic book artist. I was more of a technical artist. I learned perspective first, and I could like build the grids, and then I can move the characters in space on the page. The anatomy was kind of stiff and boxy and kind of charming, but idiosyncratic and weird. And I just started doing samples like, oh, a new convention was coming up at some small Texas town. I would spend 6 months drawing like 2 pages. And then after about 2 or 3, 4 years, you'd have about 12 pages of pretty good art. And yeah, I started entering contests online, early aughts. And there was a huge contest for called Comic Book Idol. It was on a comic book website called Comic Book Resources. And that's where I got my break. There was 210 sequential portfolios submitted. You could see them on the forum. And when I submitted, I thought, man, my stuff's, I don't know if it's as good as everybody, but it's different. It's going to stand out. I ended up getting selected as one of the 10 contestants. And then from there, we had to do like 3 or 4 pages a week. And it was like at the time of CB Cebulski, before he was the Marvel editor in chief, it was Ryan Otley was a guest judge. So every week you had a new guest judge. If you would have made it all the way to the end, you got a pin up in an image book. I made it to like number 4 or 5, and but I busted my butt, and ended up not winning the contest. But I was real proud of myself. I never put out 3 pages in a week, much less for 4 weeks in a row. And then I was like, man, I did my best. I'm good. I'm good with it, and I'm on the right path. And so I got an email from Marvel the next day, and they were like, "Do you want to work at Marvel?" And I was like, "Whoa, this is amazing." And then that was Jonathan Hickman, who's a pretty big writer now, obviously, but he was one of the guest judges behind the scenes that kind of picked the portfolios, and he had private. They all had private bets on their horses. Like, oh, I like this guy, and I was one of the guys that he put a bet up that I would win. I didn't, but he was starting to get work at Marvel, and it was Astonishing Tales Mojo World, and he wrote like he didn't write me. The editor wrote me, and I was like, well, how'd you hear about me? Because I'd never submitted to Marvel. And he's, oh, this new guy, Jonathan Hickman, likes your stuff. I said, can I get his number? So I called him and thanked him. I'm like, dude, this is amazing. I can't believe this. And he knew all my influences. He's like, oh, I can see Seth Fisher. I can see Quietly in your stuff. And then it turned out he was just a great, kind of a life mentor, a great collaborator, just a great, great dude. And the stuff that he taught me, trying to get into comics, working on comics together. He taught me about plotting, taught me about professionalism, taught me to bet on myself. That's carried through my whole life and my whole career since. And I've since told my wife the same stuff, and she's kind of got a great publishing career. She's a mystery novelist, and she wasn't published when I met her, but everything that he told me to apply to myself that made me successful in comics, she applied to her, and we just used that formula again to bet on ourselves and with our creative lives. And so Hickman was a really fortunate collaborator and a really good friend. And that's kind of how I got started in comics.
It's really cool. And then also, I like your description of the art as mashed potatoes because I feel like Mojo is such a great character to start out with for that because he basically is mashed potatoes in humanoid form.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I get pigeonholed, probably rightfully so, into those kind of a gigs. Of course I would get Bizarro and not Superman. Of course I would get always monsters. I draw monsters really well. I think it's because it is so lumpy and so organic and idiosyncratic. I think there's like probably some charm. My ego says I'm a pretty charming person, or I can make a joke well. And I think there's something, and it was in Seth Fisher's work where you could look at the work, and almost all my artists that I loved were like this because when I first started trying to draw 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, there were no podcasts. And then around 2004, 2005, there'd be someone calling up like a Mike Allred or a Frank Quietly, like from their parents' basement, right? They're going to, and I would all of a sudden get to hear their voice. And I had loved their work so much that when the interviewer would ask them a question, I could answer it for them. Like someone asked, and I'm friends with Quietly now, Frank Quietly. His name's Vincent, but I remember the first time I heard his voice, he's a Scottish guy, and the guy asked him, he's like, well, which was your favorite new X-Men to draw? And I was like, man, he loves them all. You can just tell. And he's like, oh, I loved them all. And I was like, oh God. And then like Mike Allred was the same, super cool dude, almost like I call him like the Paul Newman of comics. Handsome, married, tall, just a great dude, and draws cool, very pop culture-y. He feels like a rock star. And of course he's in a band, and like you start learning that, and the Mobius has this saying where the more an artist can't separate themselves from their work. They can't design a yogurt label without telling on themselves. And I think there's something about my whatever personality, my expressiveness or whatever that does bleed into the work. And Seth Fisher was much the same. He drew very quirky, and then I started seeing pictures of him at conventions, and he would like wear a banana suit at a show, which would be like completely obnoxious if you're the guy next to him, but but it's super cool. I think
From
Seth Fisher
afar,
was,
it's good. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but it's cool too. Like he's got some great, like he shaved. I remember seeing a picture of him with his shirt off, and he clearly had a lot of chest hair, but he like shaved it into a heart emblem. And I was like, dude, this guy's cool. Big, big like Coke glasses. And but you could just tell in his work that this was this dude. And there's some honesty about that uh in the work. And I but see if you get into like the guys that are more craftsmen that draw like super super well drawn and super well like super I always call them draftsmen or craftsmen, and they're almost like the Marvel House style guys or DC House style guys. I can't get the personality register out of them. You know what I mean? Like they draw beautiful, but I don't have the gusto, the X factor, with those guys. I collect art. I have some of that art, but I love the stuff that says something about the artist. And I think it doesn't even have to be drawn well to say something. Like a kid can draw a stick figure and it'll say, I always have this thing with comics where it doesn't have to be drawn well. It's better if it's drawn well. But as long as it's drawn consistently, if I speak in a broken language, if I speak in Ebonics or something, the consistency of the Ebonics will be the form. And if I start speaking in Old English, then that would be the flaw, right? And so like the comparison would be my daughter can do a stick figure comic and you would believe it, you would follow it along 100%. But if and this is bad because adults will see something they trace and reinforce that and be like because that looks real. And but if she did that in the comic, the actual break in the aesthetic language would be the perfect drawn thing when everything else, the self, was actually the right way to speak. So and I think when you make art, it's always good to come back to you as your center and not the outside world. What's influencing you? It's better to and I'm an enigma there because I'm so influenced by the people I love. But so yeah, it's a weird dance.
I mean, you mentioned you got kind of like pigeonholed into drawing a lot of these like monsters. I'm curious if you have like a preference for like genres or art styles. Like if you like doing more like quirky, like Bizarro type characters who are kind of warped or more like standard, like Red Wing, I think is a lot more like we see often. I'm curious if you have a specific thing you like to work in.
Yeah, I thought Red Wing was a little too cold for my stuff. I remember drawing something silly in that, and Hickman being like, "Oh, don't make it too silly." And I kind of because I gave one of the guys like a little crappy mustache, and I thought it'd be really cool. And also like one of the planes, I was like putting like some hanging dice, like they had a rear view mirror or something. And I tend to do that in the Jeff Darrow way. I think you spend so long on these pages that your mind wants to start having fun, and living in these worlds, and you're building the rooms so you can move them through the rooms. Um, I My favorite thing in storytelling, and I think it's probably the most powerful thing for me is juxtaposition. I think I'm a big fan of Danny McBride. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Eastbound and Down.
I've not, but I know I've seen other stuff with Danny McBride.
So he can be absurd, like so absurd, right? Racist, absurd, silly, but it comes back to character, and he can also get emotional. And people will tell you you can't do that, but you can. And so like I want Bizarro to be silly, but I also want him to hurt, And I think if everything's melancholy, then nothing is. But if something's really joyful, then melancholy, it's everything is relative. So that will hold that holds the hurt, or that holds the joy. If the comic itself is a system within itself, then I did this book Axe Wielder, and it's this bloody, violent book. There's a turn in it, but I knew I was going to play heavy violent because I wanted that to sell. And I knew you would think, oh, he's doing a Jeff Darrow Slaughterfest, but there's a turn in that book where I flip it and show the heart. And I did that on purpose. And I knew I was doing that when I was designing the book. Like I laid the page count out. And it's not unlike a piece of music where if I'm Animal from the Muppets and I'm just drumming, it's all noise. But if I hit it with some melody, like some harmony, and then start drumming, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, and then start hitting it faster and faster, you can look at the action like a drum beat, you know? And I think every system has that yin and yang to it, that love and truth to it, that male female spirit to it, and juxtaposition of those two is the creation, is what I think, you know. So
I feel
if
like
that
the
makes sense.
juxtaposition for axe wielder John works extra well because of how warped his face is with the
Yeah.
giant carving in it. And how did you come up with the idea for that one?
It was weird. I was in the NICU. I was a new dad with my first daughter, and she was in critical condition. She had had a like a rupture of her intestines, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. They thought her intestines just stopped working, and then and we were there for like 2 days, and she was really sick. And they have these heart monitors on, and it would, after it got so high, it would beep. And pretty soon those doctors were just coming in and pressing it. I'm like, yeah, but why is it that way? And eventually this old man doctor came in and he's like, oh, we need to take her to surgery right away. And all those young doctors didn't know what they were doing. And she had a blockage that had ruptured and lost some of her intestines and some other stuff in there. So she ended up almost, she was in critical condition. We lived in the NICU. And when I was in there, I was, doodling. We would just sit by her side all day for a couple of months. She's better now, but um, I looked down one day and I drew this big, there was a big barbarian. And the NICU's like the neonatal care unit for most of them are premature babies, but some of them have heart problems or like we had a stomach problem. But I'd drawn this barbarian covered in babies. And I didn't remember drawing it, but it was in my sketchbook. And I had this epiphany, and I have this chip on my shoulder with, I love writers in comics. Like I said, I love Hickman, love Kevin Smith and Eric. I love all the writers I work with. But I feel like a lot of times we're one fifth of the promotional arm of a writer because we're doing one book why they can do five. And Marvel, in the early or the mid aughts kind of Marvel in the mid aughts transitioned everybody. Every trade paperback is like the Hickman trade, and then the five artists aren't even mentioned on some of those covers, And I had this hiccup where I love storytelling. I don't love drawing. I love storytelling. Like I was listening to an interview with your guy who did The Devil May Cry. He's either rapping or wanting to do a novel or thinking about storytelling through different mediums, transmuting it. And I'm the same. I'm working on a novel too. I've got 15 comic book ideas. I love making shorts. I love my wife's a novelist. I love storytelling beats. We watch movies, we pause, and we're like, oh, what about this shot or that shot? And with Axe Wilder, I had this epiphany. It was really selfish, and it's in Axe Wilder too, because John is like it's the male power fantasy of what would you do to protect your kids, right? That's kind of the pitch that I can't ever say because it's spoiling, but it's been out a while now. So I thought, as I'm a new dad, well, how am I going to provide, right? Well, I'm going to do. Well, here's this moment in your life I got a sick kid. I'm a new dad. Here's this character. I don't even remember drawing it. What's his story? And it was kind of like I had a conversation with God or the ether, and it was like, all right, artist, you say you're an artist. What do you have to say about this? What do you have to say about this? And I was like, okay, this is what I have to say about this. I will make this no matter what. And I had this conversation with God. I was like, I'll make this conversation. I will make this book. I will find out what this character's story is, and I will do it to the best of my ability. Everything I've learned so far, the plotting from Hickman, my idea that actions is drum and heart is like melody, I will put everything I have into this, and I will trust the process as I move forward and try to work on this. So for 2 years, I did nothing but draw the book, and I would draw the pages like 3 feet tall, because I thought, okay, everyone's drawing 11 by 17. I'm going to make it bigger. So I drew the pages gigantic. I'm going to do more detail. I thought there's something beautiful about children when they look at you. Now, I'm a big fat idiot, but my kids look at me like a hero. And I thought, oh, I'm going to cleave his face because if those kids only see him for him, they'll still look at him lovingly. So when you pan over his back, and I'll spoil Axe Wilder here, when you pan over his back and he's been called a thief and a killer and a drunk, and you see the scars on his back, and he's been slaughtering everyone, and he's crazy because he's been talking to his skulls. The frame narrator says, but you girls just called him dad, and in his skulls that he's been talking to, that they're opened up now, and there's babies inside, right? And so I wanted to capture that. And then John doesn't talk except for yelling full power in the whole book. And then he gets his hands like this and he goes, boo. But he's doing it to the kids, but he's also doing it to the reader. So I was taking little things from my daily life as a dad. And I was like, okay, well, I loved He Man as a kid. That's a male power fantasy, right? A very curated, marketed to young boys male power fantasy because Star Wars was big and Conan was big and they blended it and Mattel wanted to make some money. But I thought, well, I loved He-Man. I'm gonna do my version of He-Man, which I call that muscle tech, where it's like rusty tech and muscles, right? So I'm gonna do that. And Heavy Metal magazine is one of my big influences, but I feel like some of those stories don't make sense sometimes. So I was like, well, I'm going to tell a full narrative. I also feel like some comics aren't written towards the end. So I wrote all 7 volumes of John before I started drawing the first thing. So I knew every twist. There's everything set up from the every line in the book pays off again, but it's got to get done. So that's my next years of my life trying to finish it. But I just took everything I had and wanted to make Axe Wilder and just threw everything I had at it, And then what I thought was the line that meant a lot to me that's in book 2 is like, all right, artist, you call yourself an artist. What do you have to say about this? And I was like, okay, you gave me this for free from the ether. I'm going to make this book, and it worked out. And so in book 2, John's going to have the same thing. Someone's going to ask, well, why'd you save these kids? You're a barbarian. And when he saves the kids, which you guys haven't seen yet, or many of your fans probably haven't read the book, but I'm taking the same thing. He's using it as a bad excuse, right? And he's going to say, "Oh, I heard the gods talk," and then the guy's like, "You heard the gods talk? Are you out of your fucking mind?" And he's like, he says, what he say, John? He said, all right, killer, go kill, And so it's the exact lesson that I didn't learn. I took it as, all right, artist, go have a big ego and make your own thing, right? Like, go be more of an artist. But really, what I need to learn is to be a better dad, to be a little more organized, a little more present in the house. But so every lesson I'm learning as a father, I've implanted in John, but it's transmuted through violence instead of whatever. So it's my huge passion project. I love it. It's super fun, but it's a lot of work and a lot of time. So and then I got to do other things to keep the lights on. Plus, I got a lot of things I want to do. I have that next shiny thing always popping up all the time. I'm working on a Southern Fried Murder Mystery novel that I really love. I just submitted it to some contest and fingers crossed it gets some traction. So I'm always playing around with too many things. I got to stay focused.
That's really cool. And also, sorry if I keep putting my head off screen. I'm blowing my nose.
Yeah, that's
But
cool. It's like it's good juxtaposition. You got like this manic idiot, and then you fire boogers off. That's character. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Actually, this is going to be a crazy segue, but I like hearing about how people pitch stuff. And you mentioned that you did a story, I think a while back, you pitched an idea for Bizarro where he comes from like a Kryptonian booger or something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I saw that. I thought it was really
Oh
funny.
yeah. So I call it's a kryptonite booger, and it was called Big Green Thumb. I had I don't know if DC ever saw it. I'd done a little work at DC, and then I sent it to the editor, and the editor was fired like a week later. So I don't know if I ever saw it, but I'll tell you what it was. It's Grant Morrison had the JLA headquarters on the moon for a while. I think it's destroyed now. But if you could make Bizarro, the idea was to give Bizarro all of his stuff, and we're actually using it. Some of these, a couple of the visual ideas in my thing, but so Bizarro's like the Walmart greeter of the JLA headquarters. He wants to be a good guy. He loves Superman. He loves Green Lantern. The story would open. I can't tell you some of the stuff, but it's just crazy. But I'll tell you after because there's a part of it that I can still use at DC at some point that we didn't farm out for some other things. But yeah. So what happens is A dead Kryptonian floats. The catalyst of the story is a dead Kryptonian body floats into the solar system. Bizarro's been messing things up at the headquarters because there's a version of Bizarro in his past where he's degrading and he's getting worse. And so it'll open with Superman trying to lovingly teaching Bizarro to plant plants. And they're like 6 months, 8 months, and you can tell they've been doing this together because he's trying to teach him impulse control. But then you pull back at the beginning and it will open with him picking his nose, and then Superman like, don't pick your nose, Bizarro. And he says, and he'll say, me am no picking my nose. He starts talking backwards, but he pulled back, and you see that he's broken all of his plants. All the progress is failing, right? So green thumb is what you call when you grow plants, and you got a green thumb on your thing. So what happens is they don't know what to do with this guy because it's juxtaposition, right? Superman is allowed to be caring because he's invincible, right? Batman, on the other hand, is always prepared because he isn't, and he knows, you know what I mean? So one's love and one's truth. Bizarro sits right in between. He's the Bizarro is the true foil to Superman because if you are the strongest man in the world, you're allowed to have that outlook of compassion. It's easy, but what if your brother is slowly dying and dangerous and could kill everybody, that you've been sent or have this moral mission to protect? Now this thing that's bonded to you is the anti Superman in a way, but he's not evil. He's just you got so your compassion is used against you. So you got practical Batman and you got Superman. But like, what do we do with this guy? Well, there's those kryptonite dust and stuff with this body. Hey, let's let the guy go get the Kryptonian. So he comes back. I don't know if you care about this, but so he gets the body. They give him his number one emblem. He gets a little kiss from Wonder Woman. The body's like sanctioned off, and what happens is Bizarro goes in and he's been reprimanded for picking his nose. And he starts looking at the Kryptonian body and he goes, me am no pick my nose. And he puts his thumb in the dead Kryptonian's nose. Well, at the ceremony, Superman gives him a hug. The kryptonite booger gets stuck on Superman's back. He's messed up. A villain breaks down on Earth, and there's a big mystery with that. And all of a sudden, Superman's depowered. Right? He goes down there. He gets his butt kicked because he's got the booger on him. Batman finds the booger, but he's got to heal up, and now they're screwed. So what does Bizarro do? He's supercharged now. He goes down to Earth and he starts being a hero. But there's more to it than that. But it's a part I can't say. But so it's like this kind of campy, loving thing. It ends with Superman floating down, like lovingly, but he's in his like hospital gown, so you can like kind of see his butt cheek, and he's floating down, and he just puts his hands on Bizarro to calm him down, and then there's a good resolution. So it's kind of like this sweet, goofy. It's not all ages, but it's almost all ages. I don't know where it would fit in the market. I think it would be a great like emotional story, but I've written it out. I worked on it for about 6 months. I was obsessed with it. I've drawn pages for it, but there were some other ideas, and we're using it in Bizarro. So Bizarro is the helper at the JLA headquarters, at least in my version of the story. And he's doing Superman's laundry, but he's messing things up. Well, red and blue make purple, right? The color's red and blue. So if he bleached it and he pulls it out and it's purple, then Superman would be like, it's messed up. And he's like, me and watched yours. And then Superman's like, you keep it, and so he pulls it on inside out. Well, now it's a reverse S, and it's a purple suit. So I got like little visual gimmicks for him to completely build him, which we use that in Bizarro 3. I told the guys about it, and they're like, "Oh, we'll use it," So that'll be in that, but it's Bizarro Lois who does it, and not Superman. But so then Superman will say, "Buddy, you got it on inside out," and then Bizarro will say, "But you ain't have your underwear on it on inside out because he's got it on the outside." So I had all these like charming exchanges of scenes that I needed to put into a whole story, and I just love the story. But then once I heard Eric and Kevin were doing the year one, all of my gags were year one gags. right? How does he get his number one? How does he get his purple suit? So obviously, I would never get to do it, at least on an official level. So what happened was DC ended up writing me and asking me if I wanted to do it. And Eric and Kevin had saw the same post you're asking about now. And when I guess when they had asked DC, which is true, they had asked DC, well, can we get Nick to do it? And DC had said, I don't think he likes us, right? Because when I was promoting Axe Wilder, I was like, creator owned, screw the big two, which is good promotion, you know what I mean? But obviously, if there's something cool there, I would draw it. I like making money and I like being on a relatively popular book. So what I did was, and then Eric said that, well, no, he keeps posting about Bizarro, and so that's how they had heard that I was interested, and then once I heard their story, it's so good. Like their script is way more a script. Mine's more like a lot of gags and a little bit immature, but they've been really cool about like a couple of the visual things that I've had. They've been letting me, pitch it to them, and then and the way they incorporated the purple suit is a million times better. It's the same gag, like it gets washed wrong, but the way they use it as a frame sequence in book three is so good. It's just you can just tell that these guys are like screenwriters and they work in TV and visuals, so they're really good. So in a lot of ways, they've let me feel a little bit of ownership with a couple ideas, which I always appreciate because I feel like as artists we do a lot of storytelling, but honestly, their script is good enough where anyone could draw it and it would be fantastic. So
Yeah, I still think the art complements it very well. Like, I think Bizarro, he's kind of like, obviously he's like kind of like funky looking, but there's also a strange innocence to him, and like I'm curious how you struck that balance, like when making the characters. Like he's got all like the mismatched teeth and whatnot.
yeah, I design wise, I well, he has to go from like a man to his final form, but I didn't want 3 issues of him not looking like Bizarro, right? If he was just a normal man. And so we argued that out early where I would do like a weird guy. It didn't look right. So what I did was take the frame of his final face, which is like high cheekbones, is very Bruce Timm, the Bruce Timm design. And I would take that and then kind of shave it off a little bit and then give him some of the characteristics of like a weird looking guy. But then the real key to all cartooning for me is the eyes, like the subtleties, like if you can like squint a little bit or cut your eyes over. Um, I got some pages back here, but there needs to be that little bit of like innocence to it. And then also zaniness, which is a weird, but I like juxtaposition, so it kind of works. I got some pages back here. Sometimes he looks too goofy, sometimes he looks better. It just depends on how well I'm drawing that day. But yeah, I think you got to make him feel tragic, if you're going to make him work. Because I think I don't like just shooting, even though I have a booger idea for mine. The heart of it is the innocence of him. And we get that in the later issues of Bizarro. Like it gets a little more. It's a tragedy. It's Frankenstein. It's not you know just backwards goofy for the sake of being backwards goofy. I feel like that's a low register of what the character could be. You know.
I was kind of surprised. Like I definitely expected like, oh, it's going to show like an innocent side of Bizarro, but there's a surprisingly dark side to him, at least in the second issue. Like it's like kind of like making people live out this fantasy of him being Superman. Like at the end when he was like flying low, slipping. It's kind of like you ever watch Black Mirror?
I've watched some of Black Mirror. Yeah,
It
yeah.
reminded me a bit of the USS Callister episode with Jesse Plemons, where he's like having all these people like helping him like live out his like fantasy.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a lot like that Twilight Zone episode of where everyone's got to appease that kid
Yeah,
or he'll
exactly.
destroy them. Yeah. Yeah, I see that's what I mean. Like their script, like the ending of two is so good because I love that because it's so dark. And he can go from like petulant toddler to this completely. which is a toddler. Toddlers are psychopaths, so he just is a toddler. They can be really sweet and loving, and then they'll be screaming and throwing a tantrum.
He's
Only thing is,
volatile.
yeah, volatile. But when Bizarro throws a tantrum, he'll just kill you and remake you, or just kill you. So I really like that. When I read that part of the script, I was like, oh, this is going to be really good. It's going to be really good in trade because the story starts looping. Stuff that was said in issue one is paying off now in three, and then in four it's going to come back. Like, I'm not going to spoil too much, but we got that opening of the Toy Man robot. I mean, that's coming back in a big way, in four, and I'm excited about that. But like, nothing because they're writing, because they're just like, if you wrote a book, you would loop back. You're setting something up to call back to. I feel like sometimes comics are just made page by page sometimes. I don't know. But I always appreciate when comics are written with plot points in mind, callbacks, um, catalyst moments, midpoint reveals. I love that, and really the lowest drop was the midpoint reveal, and I could tell really quickly and even with that bayonet, jab through the office scene at the beginning of one, like, so the toy man has stabbed the Daily Planet, and that office has like a big blade in it, and they're like ducking their head under it and talking. That's like a technique called Pope in the Pool, because it's just an office scene, but now there's pigeons flying around and stuff, and it's cool, it's like it. That's a really great technique, and I can tell these guys are really know their stuff. Not that I'm some expert at it, but I study that stuff, and I'm always admire writers that can take that stuff and elevate it. I love tropes that can be elevated. Like, some people think if you write tropes, it's not cool. I love when you can do a trope and upgrade it, and I think that the guys would do that really well. So
That's cool. I think also, I like what you say about the bayonet sticking through it because I like that they're just going about their day, like as
yeah,
it's like poking out through them. And actually, I was really impressed with how many details there were, like in the background. Like I think on the cover of the second one, I wrote some stuff down. I don't fully remember what, but like say there would be like a flamethrower instead of a fire extinguisher, or there was like a Green Lantern with like a house like a cactus sticking out of it.
yeah, yeah,
Curious how
yeah.
you go about like adding all these little like world building details because I love hearing people talk about world building.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with that kind of stuff. I actually have that cover back here somewhere. It'll probably be a big. Everything might fall, but see if I can grab it.
All right, be careful.
It'll be all right. Like, so that cover is like gigantic, but it might not even work because it's going to be like, so this is that cover there, but like with all the stuff. To me, it's just like you're living. Like, I lay this stuff out by hand, then I take a picture of it, then I zoom in on my iPad, then I print it out blue, then I print it like twice up, so it's just gigantic. But like on these details, and specifically, like, the knockers, that they're like balls that bounce back and forth on desk. Like,
Yeah.
I turn those to I turn those to squares. There, and then there's obviously a Rubik's cube is a circle. I mean, is a square, so I made it a circle. But like, this is the one I like the most. This plant that's the like, that's the super deadly plant from the Superman story that Alan Moore wrote with
Oh, the manual is everything.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Oh, that's cool.
it's just like a regular plant. There's like stuff people don't pick up on. There's all kinds of silly stuff. But so that's one. And then and this is like some kind of phaser gun, but I also put a cactus. It's like red, but it's like a Superman shoots it for something and something, but now it's just that. And then obviously I put a flamethrower in the fire extinguisher thing. But I love that stuff, but it kind of slows me down, where I'm like, here's the cactus you talked about. Like, there's another,
Yeah.
the Green Lantern, and then that. So, but I'll sit there and be like, well, what's another good gag? What's another good gag? But sometimes I just got to get stuff done.
What's the little
Some stuff,
pirate ship? I just noticed like a little pirate ship wheel. What's that supposed to reference?
that I don't know, but they wanted a handle to open this. So they wanted a handle to open this vault, which is like the inside his vault is where he keeps his pages that he built the world off of, the pages of the Daily Planet. And in the script, they wanted to open a drawer and get I forget, it wasn't, I don't think it wasn't a pirate ship thing. It was like not a key, it was something, but
Oh,
one
like
I
a
did.
safe, like
Yeah,
okay.
some kind of thing. But then I just made it a pirate ship thing, and that shows up in one when he pulls it off the table. But I put it on the outside and not in a drawer because I didn't have the space. Because like what would happen is if I've got to open a drawer, pull something out, and then do it. But instead, I just have Bizarro walk by and grab it, which saves me a panel. So sometimes I just do it for economy, which I rarely do. I usually overdraw everything. So.
I get one shot. One of my favorite shots is in the first one when he is overlooking the square Earth down. He's like spinning below, and it's like obviously it's an absurd image, but there's like something like oddly grand to it with him like overlooking this the great below. Like I'm curious how you built out that one, what you feel, how you feel it reflects what he's going through.
Oh, I loved that shot from the script, and it wasn't supposed to be that shot. The original splash page in the script, it was supposed to be a splash page, and it was going to be like him spitting off the edge of like spitting out at you, but it was going to look like a psychedelic 70s cover. And I think what happens is people see my weird stuff and think that would be cool, but I actually love the pacing. So what I did was I repitched it to him, and I knew it had to look cool if I was going to try to change the shot, you know? So I was like, I'm going to make this cool. So I had him walk to the edge, and this was their idea, not mine. Look down the face. Like they said that. They said look down the face of the thing. And they also said his toes are hanging off the edge. And they also said no one had ever in Bizarro's history walked him to the edge of his world, right? And so that was cool, you know. But when I heard that, I was like, well, I want to show that edge. I want to show that moment where those toes stop. I want to show the sheer face of it, you know? But in a splash page, that's one image. I can't get the scale, you know, because I'm either here or I'm away. I want to be here, have him look down the face, because everything you said triggered these visuals in my head. Also, he has he it's his toes hanging off. That's the words they use. But they when they saw the art, they're like, "Why is his toes hanging off?" I mean, you said that, but yeah, but we meant the boots. But so what I did in the page before is I had him stop and take his boots off. Um, because I thought it would be cool because like a god walks on water, you know, kind of cool. You know what I mean? And he's the backwards god of this world. So it was everything they said, but then I always do this when I hear the script, the visuals start popping in my brain and I just start drawing, you know, because I could there's something about me like that is living in the scene that wants to bring it to life. And sometimes, most of the times, I don't change stuff. I add panels because like Jake says this, Nick says this, Jake says this. Well, I want to be like, what? And then you saying, huh? And all of a sudden, their one panel will be three panels for me. I love decompression. I love there's a manga artist named Urasawa who did Pluto and 20th Century Boys and Billy Bat. I think he's the greatest because someone will tell someone something and that character won't say anything. It was look down and look back up and then deliver the line. And I love that decompressed pacing, you know? But yeah, that was their idea, but I modified it a little bit. And I remember texting Kevin and Eric before they ever saw it, you know, just the roughs. And they were like, "Holy crap, that's awesome!" And then Kevin, and he might have manipulated me with this. He said, "I showed my wife, who's not a big fan of comics, your layout for that, and she said that's not. She said that's not comics, that's art." And so Kevin said that, and I was like, Kevin Smith showed his wife, you know, at breakfast this picture, and now every time I'm drawing, I'm trying to impress Kevin Smith's wife. You know what I mean? I'm always thinking about that. I wonder if he's showing her that one, but which is really, he's, you know, Kevin's a really good creative, but I wonder if he's manipulating me by being like, he'll always be chasing this, you know, this text again. He'll be busting his ass. So I'm always trying to bust my ass to impress Kevin Smith's wife at their breakfast table.
How was your collaboration with Kevin and Eric? Because I've been wanting to interview Eric for a while. I've talked with a lot of people that worked on his stuff, like for Batman Unburied, Twilight of the Gods, and I'm curious how your process was with working with both of them.
It's still going on. We're starting the fourth and final issue. It's amazing. Eric's kind of the go between me, DC, and Kevin. Kevin's really busy. He's got a lot of things going on, but we're all in the same. Me, the editor, Eric, and Kevin are all in the same text chain. You know, we're just texting. oh, look at this rough. What do you think about this? Blah, 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 blah. And so it's been really collaborative. Eric has been great because Eric can call me. Eric can like call Kevin, get on like figure out script stuff or deal with any change, little tweak or change I make and kind of be the conduit to explain it. And then Eric will call me and be like, all right, man, this deadline's coming up. Let's do this. Let's do this. You can save time by doing this. Oh, love what you did there. And he gets really hands-on, which I like. But it's a pretty the system of labor is blurred, right? And I don't know if DC loves that, right? Like I think they want like script, turn the page in, but it's like it's really feels like creator owned in a way, and which I love. But I think we might have gave Paul some gray hairs on this, but hopefully he'll love it at the end. And I hope he knows that I love working at DC, and I'm really thankful to be considered, one, to give the time to try to do this the best I can, but also how thankful I am to be a part of this team because I'm really proud of the book. And I think when it's collected, it's going to be a really great book.
Yeah, it's all really cool. I think I was kind of hoping to circle back a little bit because you mentioned at the beginning you had trouble getting into comics because of like want to make sure I feel like you said it was a lot related to like the pacing between the panels, and it took me a while to get into comics too. I was always more of a manga kid growing up, and I'm kind of curious how a lot of your approach is to movement specifically because again, like manga, I was so used to like there being a lot more movement, like minimal dialogue. When I'm curious, like hey, especially for something like Axe Wielder John, which is very action focused.
Yeah, I tend to want the manga pacing as well. And that's without ever reading manga. My favorite cartoonist is a pretty quiet cartoonist. His name is Jason. He's Norwegian. He does like cat face people. He did a book called I Killed Adolf Hitler and a bunch of other books, but he's really simple and he'll have like a cat face guy breaking up with his cat face girlfriend and it'll like hit you, because he doesn't overdraw. He's like the anti me. He's like simple, the Chris Ware school where it's like real pared down. When it's real pared down, the reader can project into the vessel, but if it's really drawn, that's Nick's weird bizarro. You other it and you're aware of the messenger instead of the message. So there's a real genius to simplicity. I think manga has a great pacing thing. It's why those volumes are so thick. Like Axe Wielder, if you think about it, it's a 100-page story. That's just issue one. It's just it's there's not much there. But I did 3 panel pages. I took my time, fighting or dialogue or whatever. I don't try to overwork it. I I am of the school of the art is the engine of a comic. Obviously I'm an artist, right? So but I feel like I don't like when words I don't like when my art or anyone's art becomes a JPEG for words to sit on top of. It's not an illustration. I am moving you through space and time. So I don't like it when there's a bunch of dialogue. It's actually my like Kevin and Eric, they got a lot of words, so I decompress. I'm like, I don't want a bunch of word balloons talking. I want to because actually I like the dialogue, right? I like the dialogue. So if you got a quick, a quick phrase that's funny, well, it want to be way funnier if I go really, like I want to do all of it. And I think comics should be a vehicle. The art is the drivetrain engine. It's the drivetrain, and manga gets that well. It's just and I think there's something about probably attention spans too. Like it's just like I want to see what's going on here, and I feel like I'm making progress. Whereas if I open a book and it's a wall of text, it's hard for me to keep going sometimes, because I want to see what I love about Quietly. I'll bring him up and I can talk about, and it's weird because I don't know if I'm right. I'm just telling you my preference. I brought this up to him, and I think it's true. If Frank Quietly drew the Joker, and let's say the Joker was going to laugh, he would have him in a perfectly tailored suit, down to like the year that suit came out. He would walk him through space. the way he would cross his legs, the way he would sway his neck. When he flipped out this, straight razor, his wrist would kick. He would like frame it like this, and he would hold it up to his face and he would go, ha, 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 and you would see the bounce in him. You would know that he was laughing through time and space. That to me is perfect comics. But if Bill Sienkiewicz, who's a master painter, just drew like one big eye and a big tooth and wrote ha ha ha, which laugh is better? I couldn't tell you that Bill Sienkiewicz's big tooth and cracked lip with one ha laugh wasn't better. But for me, I love the timing, the precision, the control. And that comes down to preference because I don't know which is more effectual. If you turn the page and just get hit with a Bill Sienkiewicz glowing yellow eye with a green smile, that might actually do it for you. But what does it for me is the sequential storytelling, the art of sequential storytelling. And that's why it's been harder for me, especially the 90s stuff, when it's like I guess think about Batman putting his knee up, I'm mad now. I mean, but what does that have to do with the environment, what you're feeling, the weight of the cape? You know what I mean? And not to say that stuff isn't good because I think romanticized art is really good, but I like that. I like the timing and the reality of it. I need that to be invested in the story because to me, it's not cool pictures. I could care less about how well something's drawn. I care about the intent of the communication, and it's a communication device. So that's how I look at art. I don't know if that matters to you, but I don't know if I've just burnt down half the industry that draws badass, but you guys do draw badass. I just don't think you read as well as the guys that draw honest. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, actually, I really appreciate that part about your approach to like spacing out the dialogue because that does definitely like whenever I see like flip a page and there's just like you said a wall of dialogue, I'm like, ugh, like I want to get to the next page when stuff. And I think Bizarro especially spaces it out so well, like because I mean, even on like there's like a lot of words on the first like page after the toy soldier, but it's like there's a different panel in each one, so it's like breaking it up and.
Yeah, I added a lot of panels. Some of those pages were like 4 or 5 panels, and I made them like 8, some of them 8 to 9. And they were really understanding about that. It's my one thing I always do. Um, and but I honestly think I don't know if I slowed down the reading because I got into and there was a long conversation with Lois and Bizarro. And so I just made it a long panel. I just didn't have the time to break it out, and there was no way I could turn those into like 10 more panels. And once I saw it in print, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And I was like, have I just been slowing everything down? I called Eric and I'm like, I've been decompressing so much. Like, am I fucking this up, dude? Because it actually did kind of work as a bam, 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 but I always had this, I think it's Frank Miller. Frank Miller doesn't have a one guy talk, another guy talk, and another guy talk. And I think that's why Frank Miller reads really well, as far as the it's weird because I like a lot of guys that do use a lot of words. Like I like Grant Morrison, but I think Grant Morrison needs the Frank Quietly timing to ground the big idea. I've got to follow you through space, the art part, so I can swallow the big idea. Does that make sense? Because if Grant gets a less than great artist, it could not work, because he doesn't have the grounded timing. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I'm not here to critique the whole industry, but I got opinions. You know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate hearing said opinions. Like,
Yeah.
another thing I was going to ask, we talked a little bit about world building earlier, and for the Red Wing, it's like it's obvious, it's a short book, but I feel like there is so much going on. I'm curious if you and Jonathan Hickman wrote a lot of like notes for like the world, like the how the spaceships work a lot because they're very detailed within that story. Same thing with the Manhattan projects.
Well, Red Wing, I feels like is the most sterile of the things I've done. That was full scripts from Hickman. That was not Marvel style. And then I Hickman wanted it clean. He wanted it really clean. When I designed the spaceships, he went and like back in the day used AutoCAD to like rebuild them cleaner. He wanted it super clean. Whereas me, I would have like a bent wing and like, like it had some damage on it. But what he did with that script in particular that I liked was the traveling fighter pilots. Like he wanted to shoot down a time traveling plane and have it go from like a spaceship and then like into a biplane, and just like travel through time. And I like that. And I, that was the first time I ever drew a full issue of a comic. And so I really don't like looking at that stuff. And I thought all of my character designs were the same size. All the characters were the same size. And I realized looking at the Simpsons silhouettes, like you can silhouette any character from the Simpsons. And I realized on Manhattan Projects, I'm never doing what I did on Red Wing again. So I took Einstein or General Groves and I gave him a box nose. So when I turned it, it would look different, a teardrop nose. And I just focused on shape information. So those guys would read a watermelon head, like a Stewie head for Oppenheimer, right? I would, so I wanted to black them out, silhouette them, and tell who they were. If you black out any of the characters in Red Wing, you can't tell them apart. It's such a huge failure, but I was such a young cartoonist at the time that, and I was also not I could have done it if, like on Mojo World, I can do it because some other smarter cartoonists came before me and made the designs great, right? But on Red Wing, I'm like, wait, I've got to learn how to design stuff now. Like what, like that's actually is a huge part of the job. You actually have to design stuff. You actually got to be a character designer. You've got to be a world builder. You've got to also know how to act because if I if I always act like me, I'm just a big Italian guy. But what if it's subtle acting? What if I'm just slightly hurt? So now you've got to be an actor. You've got to be a great draftsman. You've got to be able to draw it all from your head. I don't light my stuff because I don't spot shadows, but you really should, or at least indicate it and know how it would move. So you're like a cinematographer, a special effects artist, a character designer. You're uh you're the director in a lot of ways. You're the editor because you're deciding what the final page is going to look like and the pacing. Like there's so many jobs, and to just get thrown that it's great. It's great to learn, but there's so much learning that I did not know how to do on Red Wing that I don't like looking at it. Whereas Manhattan Projects, I was like, oh, I'm going to put my personality in this. Oh, I'm going to learn from cartoons. Oh, I get the assignment. My silhouette's got to read individually. Oh, Hickman's trusting me with plot, hitting these plot points. I get to move these guys through environments. But I was doing some weird stuff. Like Feynman was kind of a womanizer in the Manhattan Projects, and he was kind of into himself. Hickman said one time that he like cuts his eyes and looks in the mirror, right? And I didn't know how long that would carry because every time I had Feynman in the background, he had like a handheld mirror out, right? But really, if you're reading a book and someone does that once early, that carries for at least 6 issues. But in my head, it had to be like every time, so it got a little zany with some of the redo. But I've learned a little to be a little more subtle. I don't know. There's a lot of new. You can pick any of these topics and go down the rabbit hole of any of this stuff. It's all consuming in a way.
For Manhattan projects, one of the my favorite visual cues in it is when a lot of the flashbacks will be in the red and blue colors. I'm curious what sparked the decision for that in particular.
That was Hickman. Hickman's got a great design sense. Hickman was a graphic designer, was running a graphic design firm before he went into comics. And so if you notice the spine of his books, they're all the same. He knew he was putting a product and he needed a visual anchor. He knew that if he designed a cover, he was going to do a circle and like do it. He is a very thoughtful one. He's a great creator, but he's a very thoughtful visual creator. So he had his ideas for the red and blue, and that's just smart because then the flashbacks, instantly read. You don't have to do anything else. And production wise too, a little easier to color because it's only two colors, right? uh he's not waiting on me for covers because he's got his weird design covers, so a little easier to make so we can hit deadlines. And he's really good about stepping back and looking at the whole, not just of a plot but of a project. of a collaborator, of, he's a very thoughtful creator, both visually, project manager wise, uh, and for me, he's always been the adult in the room. Even with top 10 people, adults in the room, Hickman, people will probably look to Hickman for the answer. He's like that kind of guy. He's a monolith and a big thinker, but he's a dude too. He's not like smoking a pipe and, up in the mountains of, the Carolinas, wherever he's at. You could call him and he'll laugh with you and be like, "Don't overthink it." He's just a good dude. I really appreciate Jonathan Hickman. He's a great dude.
Right thing. And then one of the last questions I was going to ask is I always like talking to people. That's why I was psyched to hear about the Bizarro Booger pitch because I love. Are there any other IPs or like characters you'd want to work with in the future that you haven't yet? Like,
There are some. I've got ideas for a few. What I've found is, as a storyteller, like if me and you were to say, "Oh, you could tell me any character. Tell me it's the Texas tornado." We would go down, look it up, and get in a room and be like, "Oh, what about this? Oh, what about this?" And you I think creativity isn't about an idea. I think it's about a restriction. I think all creativity comes down to restriction. Meaning, if I'm going to sit down and make a novel, well, it could be anything, or make a book, it could be anything. It's actually really good to say what it's going to be. Like, I'm going to draw a cowboy smoking a cigarette, about to draw his gun and shoot his cow in the head. Right? Now I've got an assignment. Now all my creativity can focus on how to get him about to blow his cow's brains out. I don't know why, but this is what we're going to do. Now that unlimited potential has a nucleus, a restriction to build around. And I feel you could give me any character in comics, especially if a couple people we could spitball with, and you could make it awesome, because it's already got it's the canon is the restriction, or it's like the thing you can play off of as a reflection, and comics are kind of really fun in that way. But at that point, why don't I just do it myself and own all of it? Why am I going to go make it for someone else? But there are characters that I would like to be associated with. I'm very proud to be associated with Bizarro. I hope, I'll be one of those, like, people are going to bring this to me for many years and be like, "You did this with Kevin and Eric. This is cool," and maybe it'll be like one of those 9.99 trades in 10 years, so everyone will have it. But first, the hardcover, and let's make some money. But I want to be associated with a few key pillar. Like, I've done like probably 30 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle covers, and every show that has me lists me as a Ninja Turtle artist. But because it's like easy, Oh, my wife was able to say, she was at a conference, and if she says her husband's a comic book artist, that she's basically just told the person her husband's a bum. Like, you know what I mean? But and she could kind of see that's what they thought. But then it's hard for her to say, well, he has a cleaved off axe wielder character. Oh, so he's a psychopath and a bum, right? But now she can say, oh, he's working at DC Comics with Kevin and Eric, and like, oh, what? Like, it's a different prestige. So there is cool things. And back to the original thing, like what got me into comics, and this is probably a good way to end it. I was a kid who loved action figures. I would play with them, and I was like 13, 12, 13, and it was getting awkward. Why am I still playing with action figures? And what it was is it was storytelling. They were my vehicles for storytelling. When I started drawing at 17, 18, 19, I learned perspective, and I'm moving those figures around again to tell stories again. It's always been storytelling. And the medium could be an action figure, the vessel's already there, or comics, you know, I got to draw the vessel, or prose. I've got to illustrate in words and build from there. Or I've never done moving pictures, but I've played around with some of those, Procreate Dreams and different things to like, it's all about storytelling, but obviously just talking, like if you're a guy who can be funny, you're probably calling things back. You're reading people's faces to see what's hitting and not. Uh, I think it's all storytelling, and then I think I love storytelling more than anything. And comics is just a acceptable way that I got good enough that I'm allowed to do it. And so if I ever got to work at DC on another character, I'd be really honored. I would want it to be good, you know, and if I get to make my own stuff, I'm going to try to make it good, and hopefully I can stay disciplined and get it done. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's very nice talking. I'm hoping we can talk again after the issues 3 and 4 are out, 'cause I'm very excited to see what happens with those.
Dude, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for reaching out, and good luck to you on your own creative journey.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
See you, brother.
Bye.